Hello there everyone, whether you be a newbie or an oldie, I welcome you to this Silver Age Riptide deck tech. I went through a lot to finally get a working Riptide list in this format. Riptide in Silver Age feels a lot like Riptide in CC on release, which is he just doesn't have the tools he needs to really compete in the game. It feels like he's thrown in the deep end and he can't swim. But I found a list, after many times drowning, that might just about keep you afloat. And so without further ado, I ask you to maybe like and subscribe, and we'll now get into the deck type. So whether you're new to Riptide or you already know Riptide well, there's going to be something in here for you. If you're new to Riptide, he's a ranger. He has two effects. Whenever you play a card from hand, you can put a card from your hand face down into your arsenal, and whenever a trap you control triggers, you deal 1 damage to the attacking hero. Traditionally, Riptide lists have tended to lean towards either the first or the second effect. These are desperate times though, and so I've built a deck that really uses both to try and win every game. The first effect is really good for going wide and for playing small efficient offensive hands, and the second effect is really good for slowly chipping away at our opponent and blocking above rate. You might notice as well that Riptide starts on 19 life. That's because he's broken, but not in the good way. So let me show you what equipment we're using. For a helmet, I'm just using Hope Merchant's Hood as the main one. This might be a bit of a weird choice, but bear with me. So in this deck, I play a lot of traps that are they're known as crew traps, and you can only play those from Arsenal. You need to play these to have a single chance of winning against fatigue decks. And so a problem you'll often come across is if you see too many crucible traps in your hand and you can't reload them, you basically have an entirely non-functional hand for that turn and for the turn after potentially. And so Hope Merchant's Hood is your emergency valve. It just fixes your hand when you need it. As well, another failure state you get with Riptide is if you draw no arrows in your hand when you've got full tempo. Again, Hope Merchant's Hood, it helps you out in that situation. A bit of advice, only use this when you really have to. It's very tempting to pop this when you have a bit of a middling hand and you're like, oh, this hand could maybe be better, let me gamble. Trust me, save it for when you really need it most, and it will do you some very good work. For the chess pieces, I'm playing Blossom of Spring and Concealed Sedative. So Blossom of Spring, this is in for any deck that I don't think can fatigue me. So that's wizards and really bad blocking aggro decks, because gaining 1 resource equals drawing a card with Death Dealer, and that's a very good rate, very good chess piece to have. For anything that I think can fatigue me, I play the Concealed Sedative for 2 reasons. One, the 1 damage you get from Riptide is actually very important. It helps slowly chip away at those fatigue decks. And secondly, the effect to give them an inertia can be really important if you're about to take a big turn, because you can potentially get rid of a D-React from their arsenal, and now you're more likely to get damage through. So that's when you play Concealed Sedative. For the main board arm slot, Bullseye Bracers, this is a really powerful piece of equipment. Has Arcane Barrier 1, which is super useful. It's the only AB you can play as a ranger in this format that isn't trash. And then the effect on it is obviously very good. Depending on whether or not you play into fatigue or aggro, you'll use this differently. For fatigue, I like to save this for a pitch stacked last turn kill so that I can go wide, and into aggro, it enables really small, efficient hands that Riptide excels at. So very powerful equipment piece. And then for the leg piece, Bolton Boots, Battle Worn 1, so it's basically the only armor we have. Everyone else is allowed to have armor except Ranger for some reason. And then the attack reaction effect on this lets you go wider, so into fatigue, that's very handy. And as well, if aggro gives you the space, you can utilize it to the maximum effect. And it costs 1 to use the reaction, but do not fret. We have a lot of resources to spare in this deck. For the bow, I'm playing Death Dealer. I don't think there's any other viable alternative in Silver Age to Death Dealer. You load, you draw a card, that's really good. And then the quiver is Driftwood Quiver. We have a lot of traps in this deck, and so you might find yourself needing to clear out your arsenal if your opponent doesn't attack you. Say you're playing against an Acilio, for example, you have some D-Reacts. Use Driftwood Quiver once a game. You should never need to do it more than once ever in a game. If you do, you've done something wrong. And you can rest assured that that's fine, because it means you've got something to improve on. But yeah, it shouldn't happen more than that. And if you're worried that you do get trap locked and your opponent will try hold you to a draw, that's not a real fear. Think about it. If you're playing against Riptide in Silver Age, let's say you're a Briar, you're playing Briar, best deck in format, you're playing against a Riptide, and you find your Riptide opponent has a trap stuck in their arsenal, are you going to be like, oh yes, I'll take the draw? You're not, because you're playing as Riptide. It's embarrassing to get a draw. It's also bad for you as well. So yeah, Drifter Quiver does the job. And then the sideboard pieces of Nullrune Boots and Nullrune Hood, these are just in here for the wizard matchups. AB3 is very important in this deck because nearly half of the deck is traps, and we have a lot of resources so we can pay for the AB3. And if I was only playing AB1 and I drew the half of my deck that's just traps, I would lose on the spot because I would take so much damage and I'd spend several turns trying to filter out those cards from my hand. So having AB3 means I can always convert my hand into the wizards. Now for the main board, I'll quickly go through the arrows first. Bolt and Shot, this card is really important for beating fatigue. It pairs super well with Bullseye Bracers because Bullseye Bracers gives it go again, and then Bolt and Shot gets reload. This card is a bit of a mind game card in Riptide because the reload text on it is sometimes fake because of Riptide's hero ability, but sometimes it's real as well, and your opponent is the one that has to figure that out. So you'll often put your opponent in quite a bind with this card, which is a fun place for you to be. And then Drill Shot, as I said earlier, everyone else in the game is allowed armor except Ranger, and so we want to level the playing field a bit. As soon as your opponent's armor is gone, the game becomes so much easier because you present so many break points with so many on hits. What you'll often find is that your opponent just gives armor to Drill Shot. Even if it's coming in for 4, it's so tempting for them to just like give their armor and be like, okay, I got my value, I don't need to worry about it. But that's a good trade for you. You want your opponent to give armor, you want to get through it as quickly as possible, so you need Drill Shot. Dry Powder Shot, this is just a 1-card 5 into the aggro decks. Into the slower decks, it just takes more cards to them. They either have to take damage if they want to send a good hand, or they block and you can set up without having to take too much damage. So yeah, it's just a good rate on an okay arrow. And then onto some spice here, Fatigue Shot. This card is really, really important in the deck. The thumbnail, I said this deck destroys aggro, and Fatigue Shot, believe it or not, is a big reason as to why. So when it hits a hero, the base of their first attack action they play next turn is halved. That combos very well with Frail Swingline. A lot of people have been trying to make that trap work with frailty stuff, and Fatigue Shot is the best card for working with that because it guarantees the attack comes in for less than its base. So into aggro, they're almost always going to take this. You draw your Frail Swingline, they discard a card, great time. And into the hard matchups like Guardian, this actually has a relevant on hit because now their attack for 10 would come in for 5, so it buys you tempo against a Guardian that's trying to kill you. So really good card for the deck, very powerful. And speaking of good cards, I'm playing 4 copies of Infecting Shot, 2 in the red and 2 in the yellow. So these are just really good amounts of damage. Riptide in this format is super fatigable, and so we need to put arrows in here that offer really, really good damage. That's what Infecting Shot does. The red one, it's a 2-card 7, which is great. And the yellow one, it's a 2-card 6, but also because it's yellow, you can pitch it for Death Dealer to load your bow. And then in the second cycle, you still have threats in deck that your opponent has to care about. And we do have ways in the deck to force these through, which I'll go into later. And then the only main deck buff I'm playing is Laced with Bloodrot. It's a 1-card 5 if it hits. This is a very important part of your pitch stack into Fatigue, which I'll go over later. And then Searing Shot, similar to Dry Powder Shot in that it's sort of a 1-card 5. This one's a little bit better though because it works better with Riptide's hero ability. That's basically the only reason it's in here. Into aggro, having these 0 for 4s that have on hits is very, very powerful because the play pattern you want to do is block with all the traps in your hand, reload an arrow from Riptide and fire that arrow. Very effective and above rate play pattern. And then start going through the traps now on the main board. There's only 3 different traps in the main board. Courageous Crossing and Quickening Sand. I'm going to go over these 2 together because they basically fill the same role. Turn 0, going first against aggro decks. I can play these and target myself to give myself a nice little bonus for the next following turns. If I'm playing against Fatigue, I'm always going to target my opponent with these effects because giving my opponent a Quicken token or a Might token means that when they swing their weapon in, it triggers my traps and I can get damage through. So these are very important for not being fatigued. And again, into aggro, when you block with them, they're probably going to trigger the effects, so you get to block 3, ping for 1. If it's Quickening Sand, you maybe even disrupt as well. So these are really strong cards for the deck. Good into aggro, good into fatigue. They are the glue for the deck in Silver Age. And then the first Crucible Trap, Rockslide Trap in CC. This thing isn't very good. But in Silver Age, desperate times mean desperate measures. And so basically by playing these Crucible traps, we're guaranteeing our opponent loses life during the course of the game. And because Rockslide Trap is a blue, it makes it into the main board because it pays for the bow to fire things like Fatigue Shot, Infecting Shot, the Bolt and Boots, etc. So very important card. If you are new to Riptide, one thing to note, we call these the Crucible traps because they can only be played from Arsenal, and they have effects that always trigger. So when you play them as a defense reaction, Riptide pings. So that's why they're in the deck. I'll move on to the sideboard now. 2 Arcane Polarity. That's just in here for the wizard matchups. You can play it from your hand to reload as well to really get some efficient plays going, so it's a cool card for the deck. I'm playing 2 copies of Frailty Trap, 2 copies of Inertia Trap, 2 copies of Boulder Trap, and 2 copies of Tar Pit Trap. So the idea into Fatigue is that I play the Courageous Crossing and the Quickening Sand with the respective traps that are relevant for those effects, and then I use these traps to get damage through against my opponent. Into the aggro decks, these are just very good value. Another thing to note with Frailty Trap is it can sometimes help you trigger Frail Swingline, so there is the synergy there as well. But if you're thinking about cutting any of these, I assure you, you can't. You really need the damage against the Fatigue decks to beat them. Most of your damage is going to come from traps. Next, for the buffs in the sideboard, 2 copies of Lace with Frailty. This is in the sideboard because I don't play it into Fatigue because they'll just block it out. This is in here for the matchups that want to race me because A, I slow them down, and B, I can trigger Frail Swingline a bit more often. Spellbane Trap, really love the design on this. Sadly, you can't really use the trap part to recycle in Sage like we can in CC. However, Briar, don't know if you've heard about her, is quite popular at the minute, and this is very, very good into Briar because when you block against Briar, you'll often get 4 value from the Spellbane Trap, maybe more if you use the Spellbane Aegis to stop Assidual Suffering from buffing itself. So this is potentially 5 value on blocking into Briar, and the worst you'll get from it is 3 plus 3 on your arrow. So very good card, very solid. And now for the way we force damage through into the Fatigue decks. Razor Reflex. We have no evasion in Silver Age. We can't go wide enough to beat the horrible Fatigue decks, so we have to try something different. 4 copies of Razor Reflex is, in my opinion, a necessary evil. We have the resources to pay for it, and if you consider all the trap damage you'll do throughout the game, and you'll maybe chip through maybe 4 to 6 damage with Razor Reflexes, and then you've got your last turn pitch stack combo, then that will sometimes be enough to beat Fatigue decks if you do it properly. And so Razor Reflex on an Infecting Shot is very, very powerful. But in all honesty, you just play them as soon as you see them because you just need to get the damage through. So they're a vital piece of the puzzle for beating Fatigue. And the final piece of the puzzle for Fatigue is the last 2 Crucible traps, Tripwire Trap and Pitfall Trap. So because I'm on 6 Crucible traps, that means my opponent is starting the game at 14 life if I resolve all of them, which I will because I can only activate them as D-reacts. So I'm making my Fatigue opponent start at 14 life, and my aggro opponents as well. But I'll talk about Fatigue because aggro is a bit more straightforward. If we include Pitfall Trap, if I'm lucky, I might get the effect off on it. So it deals 2 damage, so maybe in the best case scenario, my opponent's actually starting on 10 life. And then if I factor in the non-Crucible traps and the Quickening and the Courageous Crossing, then I'm getting a few more pings through as well. Ideally, from traps, we get about 12 to 14 damage through against Fatigue. And then the last card in the deck is Frail Swingline. This is in the sideboard because against the decks that want to block you out, this has no text. Against the decks that don't want to block you out, this has potentially some very good text. As I said before, it combos well with Fatigue Shot and your Frailty stuff. So very solid card for aggro. Blue block 3 into them. It's a cool card. It's the thing that lets you get that edge into aggro when it triggers. And so yeah, the last thing I'll talk about is the way you set up to beat Fatigue. So if a game has gone according to plan, you'll have chipped away at them with your traps, you'll have got a few Razor Reflexes through, and now you're down to your pitch stack. So what your pitch stack needs to be is a red Bolt and Shot in Arsenal, a Lace of Bloodrot in hand, a red Bolt and Shot in hand, a red Infecting Shot in hand, and a resource card. What you're going to do is play the Lace of Bloodrot, fire the Bolt and Shot for 7 go again. By this point, hopefully, cards like Boulder Trap and Drill Shot will have removed your opponent's armor, so your opponent had to block 7 on this one. You then activate your Bullseye Bracers, load in the other Bolt and Shot, 5 go again. Your opponent will probably block that one out. You go Death Dealer, load the Infecting Shot, and with the last Lace of Bloodrot on top of your deck, you fire Infecting Shot for 8 with double Bloodrot on hit. That should be enough to win the game. It doesn't always go according to plan, but it's the only plan I've been able to come up with that actually consistently beats fatigue without giving up anything really into wizard or aggro. And that concludes the Riptide deck tech. Hopefully this has given you a good starting point for the deck. I really feel like you're not that well positioned in Sage, if I'm being honest. Riptide has again been done dirty in another format in terms of the cards he has access to. This deck, it does do the job it's meant to do, but you'll have to work twice as hard as your opponent in a lot of cases to get the win. You cannot make mistakes with this deck. It really feels like you've stretched the deck to like its outer limits. Like this is the aggro side, this is the fatigue side, and you've really stretched it to the maximum limit on both sides. But one thing I will say that Riptide has going for him is you can build him to pretty much be any deck. Ranger has a phenomenal toolbox, and so if you know what that meta is that you're going to be playing against, let's say you know everyone's going to be playing Briar, which let's face it, this ProQuest season they probably are, you can build a Riptide deck that beats Briar. You just struggle into a really wide field because the power level of your deck is a bit lower than a lot of the other decks, and so you really need to tailor the cards in your deck for a specific matchup. So if you can do that, great. If not, good luck. And so that concludes all I have to say. I wish you a very good day.